I just cannot believe this is happening.
Mortimer mumbled to himself, the bridge of his nose pinched between his thumb and index finger of his left hand, his eyes straining to stay shut. He put the teddy bear in the pit of one of his arms and started to wave both up and down in front of Tony, his hands moving in a mildly hypnotic manner. His eyes were spread wide as he gazed deeply at the man before him and stated clearly,
You didn't see anything out of the ordinary. You will go back to the living room and forget all about this situation.
Tony stared at him for a brief moment before his face changed to mirror the confusion he was feeling. Despite his better judgment, Tony knew he had to respond. He put his index finger and middle finger together as the rest moved toward his palm. Instead of spreading the two fingers apart into a victory gesture, however, he waved the hand that bore them through the air between them. Dude, you're not a Jedi. Mortimer's head jutted back in shock, dipping behind his shoulders before moving forward again, his eyebrows concentrating.
How are you?
He took a few steps to his left, and when he was at the bottom of the stairs, he cupped his hands to his mouth. Tony figured out what was coming next, but he didn't have time to cover his ears.
Eve?
What?
She replied, her voice carrying clearly from wherever in the manner she was, and it was quite obvious from the tone that she did not appreciate being interrupted from whatever task she was currently doing.
We've got a situation down here.
A few minutes later, Eve stomped down the stairs, her hands on her hips.
Okay, what's the problem?
Mortimer extended his hands at Tony, shaking them profusely. She turned to look at him in confusion.
Huh?
She then proceeded to create a mocking version of the same hand motion Mortimer had used earlier. He watched silently at first, his arms crossed, the teddy bear still messing with one of them.
So? Get to work with your mojo like you always do.
Don't you think I would have done that by now?
He seethed. Eve rolled her eyes.
Knowing you, probably. What's your point, Morty?
I wouldn't have called you down here if it had worked.
He exploded.
Alright, I can see how this might be a problem then.
She said, blinking in confusion. Excuse me. Tony interrupted meekly, a hand raised as if he were still in school.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't meaning to act like you weren't here.
She apologized, her features softening as if coming out of a trance. It's not that. Could you clarify something for me? Tony sighed, then pointed to Mortimer. He's a real vampire, right? You know, silver, steaks, garlic and all that?
Well, not exactly everything you've read or watched has to do with real vampires. But yes, he is a vampire.
So, where's his tape? And he has a French accent? He asked, doing a mock Boris Karloff impersonation. Finally, he looked back at the man in question and pointed at his stuffed animal. And he sleeps with a teddy bear? Mortimer leaped forward at Tony with every intent of tearing him to pieces. Had Eve not pulled him away in that instant, he might have followed through.
Why, you insufferable brat!
Morty, stop this right now.
She commanded, and as Tony trembled, he shouted out the only thing that came to mind as he cowered behind her. Eve! Sorry, Mortimer. The bears are still cool for adults to sleep with. The vampire crossed his arms and, fuming, glared down at him. Eve stood between them, and Tony ducked his head out.
So you're making jest?
Yeah, that thing. I mean, I still slept with one until I was 13. You're only, what, 35, 40?
I shall be 529 this coming spring.
Mortimer said with great satisfaction, his head held high. Oh, you look good for a geezer. The moment the last word came out of Tony's mouth, Mortimer's eye twitched, and his fingers seemed to stretch and become more rigid, sharper. Tony hid behind Eve again as Mortimer shook.
For a what?
He exclaimed as he stepped closer. He's not going to kill me for disturbing his sleep or finding out his secret, is he?
Not anymore. Now he's going to kill you for insulting him.
Eve said coolly. Oh, he said, then thought for a few seconds as the man moved closer still. That's worse, right?
Just a bit.
She said as she crossed her arms. Mortimer stopped in front of her and stared straight into her eyes, a fire burning within his own, an inferno within hers.
This is not about keeping it a secret anymore. This is about my honor. Move out of the way, Eve, or I'll...
Or you'll what?
She said each word slowly and sharply.
I...
Mortimer's jaw fumbled for words for a few moments before he moved to the closest wall and began to bang his head against it. Eve shut her eyes and Tony tried to escape, tiptoeing quietly towards the stairs.
Tony!
Slowly, Tony walked over to Mortimer and, drooping his own head, tapped the man's shoulder. Mortimer? Vampire or not, I shouldn't have said all those things about you. I'm sorry. Mortimer turned around slowly, his face blank and emotionless. I was scared and wasn't thinking. Suddenly, a slight amount of color and pleasure could be seen in his face.
Really?
He held Tony by both shoulders at a distance, his face inquisitive and filled with mild disbelief as well as hope.
You were really frightened? Deathly so?
Yeah, why wouldn't I be? Mortimer clenched his fists and stood in what appeared to be a minor victory pose.
Yes! You have no clue how long it's been since I've been able to scare someone. Mistress rarely has guests, and typically she orders me to behave.
He moved around and rambled until Eve spoke.
So you weren't going to kill him then?
Mortimer jerked to a stop and emitted a small gasp of shock, both of Eve's interruption and realizing what he had been doing. He pulled Tony aside and huddled him close while Eve pretended to be bored, melodramatically yawning. Then again, Tony supposed that she might have indeed been awoken by Mortimer's earlier shout. It was late after all, but she had replied to it almost immediately. If she had been asleep, she was a very light sleeper. She was wearing the same clothes as earlier, but it was perhaps possible that she had taken a nap in them, seeing as they were a lot more wrinkled than before.
Are you going to tell anyone about this day? What you saw?
Tony let loose a small laugh, despite the severity of the vampire's tone of voice. Are you kidding me? Everyone would just try to get me institutionalized.
True.
Mortimer said and thought for a moment before moving away from Tony. He stood there, hands on her hips, eagerly awaiting his reply.
Not today. Maybe later. If he disturbs my sleep again, or worse.
Good. Then you two can wrap things up as he finishes his tour.